And one of the major challenge relative to the biofuel is that there are multiple ethical concerns, the ethical criteria established for the biofuel production. These ethical concerns must be on a priority understood, and they must be answered. The first and foremost, the human rights. The production of bioenergy and biofuel should not violate the right and liberties of individuals. The main duties are to preserve and the access to food and water. Right? We must not utilize, while producing the biofuels itself, one of the major challenges to maintain the rights toward the right towards food itself. Though the policy which has been created recently or under the National Jatropha program also, this has been properly indicated that any type of the oil crop would be grown in degraded lands. But through cropping or through vegetative cover, degraded lands can also be converted into utilizable land. Then what happens to the patch of the land if it has been converted or is being reclaimed? Whether it would be brought again back to the food cropping or not, that has not been identified also. With the advent of climate change, this will happen in another 20 years also, that the agricultural crops would eventually convert into degraded lands. Then it would pose an opportunity towards a large group of the bioenergy producers that they will try to utilize those lands for bioenergy production by claiming that majority of the lands are degraded. Right? That would also reduce the tendency of producing the agricultural crops, or the overall agricultural productivity may also suffer in that case also. This would be a twisted mechanism generated by these people or by these companies or by these individuals which are involved over here. Now that twisted mechanism which would be generated, or that twist that can be generated, that okay fine, we have an agricultural cropland, now this is degraded, that we'll fix something up with the local government and we'll try to claim this land as the degraded land, and we'll start producing bioenergy, right? Bioenergy based crop. Now this is in mid of many lands together. Right. One land has started producing bioenergy, other farmers are also motivated, they will also get the paperwork done, and then the complete area which was growing wheat or rice earlier is now being converted to production of bioenergy based fuels. So the ethics of doing so, or ethics and understanding of doing so, would hamper the basic human rights, because the first and foremost right on land and agriculture is to produce food, not energy. Right, so that must be properly identified, that the access of land should be for food first priority, second for energy, and this must not be ever compromised. Right. Second thing, the environmental sustainability. Biofuel production should provide environmental benefits and ecosystem services to the society and environment. That is ethically quite correct. Right. Under this criteria, under this, the criterion should avoid the excessive production of energy crops, especially in developing countries, because obviously the developing countries have more and more demands which are being generated for fuel, and more demands should be generated for such type of the fuels also, because alternative technologies are grown at a very slow rate. Right. So, it can cause changes in the land use, direct and indirect. That is what we have been speaking of with the first point also. Clearing up of the land, loss of biodiversity, excessive water use, and increased pollution from the use of fertilizers and pesticides. Right. That would eventually create a pressure. Right. Deforestation chances are also higher. Right. In many cases, the land mafia or the local mafias, then they would or those which are playing up with the forest, or which are involved in deforestation activities, such type of the groups, they will also influence. They would eventually influence that deforestation practices can be taken place, or clearing up of the land can be taken place, and that is identified as degraded land, now converted for energy cropping. That can also happen. That would eventually lead towards loss of biodiversity of food crops. A pressure would be created on the forest ecosystem also. That would also be loss of biodiversity. A pressure would be created completely on the ecosystem services which are being provided, and it would be limited only towards production of the energy crops also. That eventually would be ethically not correct, right? So the sustainability, or the ecological service sustainability, or environmental sustainability must be taken up, right? We must not debate this thing that biofuels are pro-environment. Biofuels are being created, and biofuels are created as the sources which are environment friendly, right? Yes, they are environment friendly because they help in reduction of the emissions, but this is one face of the coin. environment or ecosystem does not goes only with the reduction in emission. It goes with various different services which can be generated for the ecosystem or the environmental utility also. So it is rather not only conservation of the environment or conservation of the air quality, it is rather the environmental sustainability which must be taken up at a priority, which must be taken up as the frontline thing rather than other things also. So the ethical use of biofuel, up to what extent and beyond which extent the production has to stop, or up to what extent we can go up for blending, right? This is quite logical. This is quite logical to think that if there is biodiesel which is available and which can be domestically manufactured, why not to invest with the automobile sector and develop engines which run over biodiesel only, then phase out diesel, introduce biodiesel. Then the demand for the fuel per day, specifically the diesel based fuel, if we look up to 20 billion liters of the fuel is being utilized per day in India. That simply means 600 billion liters of the fuel per month, right? That this is a huge amount of the fuel which is being utilized. And if we say we'll cut down the fossil fuel completely, well, this is a simple logic which would be generated, that if there is an alternative source, if there is biodiesel, why not we cut down the use of diesel immediately? Because there are many problems: the production, cost, refining, then sulfur, then particulate matter, all of these, they are problem. Why not to simply switch over to biodiesel? We'll produce more biodiesel, we'll burn more biodiesel, we'll produce more of the pollutant, they would be absorbed while production of the biodiesel crops only, and all of it would be adjusted and would be a carbon neutral state that can be created, right? This is quite logical. But do we have that amount of the land resource available that we can supplement at least 20 billion liters of the biodiesel every day in the country, and that demand would eventually increase? Is it possible? And if it is possible, if that quantification is being done, then is it or the actual justice would be given, right? That the food grains may not be would not be compromised while producing a much amount of the biodiesel. That surety, that ethics of the use, that is one major question. And we cannot immediately shift up to new pattern of cultivation. People will still grow wheat. People will still prefer to grow rice, or they will still prefer to till the degraded lands and try to grow the arid crops like sorghum and barley rather than going for plantation of jatropha also, right? So we have to understand the nature of it also. And then industrial production of biodiesel at a large scale, when we say industrial production of biodiesel can take place, tanks and all that, then setting up of the industries also require the land resources. So ideally we have to identify this thing also, that biofuel utilization or biodiesel utilization or biodiesel production, bioethanol utilization does not lead towards any form of the land use change, because that is what we have spoken of, that biofuels are advantageous because they can revert the land use and land use change. Rather, it must not be a scenario that biofuels themselves have created the land use change mechanism. That is one major problem that would be generated also, right? Apart from this, the climate change mitigation. The production and use of biofuel assess the reduction in greenhouse gas emissions to the atmosphere. For this, it is necessary to develop methods of certification to corroborate that indeed there is a reduction in emission. In this way, the effects of the changes in land use and increase in GHG emission, a situation that has been brought into question, that sustainability of the biofuels are avoided. In this case, the life cycle analysis appears to be effective tool for this posting. So overall, climate change mitigation through biofuel, if it is being identified, then there must be proper quantification of it that should be done. Then right to fair reward. Biofuel production should be done under fair trade criteria, giving them opportunities for development and competition from the producers also, right? Fair trade is also focused on working practices where they must respect the labor and intellectual property rights also. And apart from this, the fair trade would also be when biodiesel would be brought into, they would compete with the fossil fuel based economy. And this is one of the major driver of the globe, the fossil fuel economy. And of course, when a competitor in that field would come in, there would be various problems which would be created from the fossil fuel economy against the biofuel based economy also. That is also one major problem that would be generated, that ethics of managing that must be understood. And then the equitable distribution, the cost and benefits of environmental, social, economic or political aspects of biofuel should be distributed equally amongst all the producers and users. We must identify, we must understand the nature, type of the benefits which are being given. It is not so that the benefits are only given to oil producing companies or oil distributing companies. The benefits must also be on a priority must be given to the farmers, right? There must be a proper rights protection of the farmers also in case of biofuel and biofuel development. So all of these, they remain one of the major challenge also in future for despite having a biofuel policy, or when we say biofuel policy, it has just created a market mechanism. It has just created a market mechanism. Or if we say, or if we simply say that biofuel policy has answered just one part of the biofuel related aspects, then it is also correct that one part of the biofuel related aspect has been answered, but the actual demand has not been answered, or the actual scenario has not been taken care of.